see the inequality in my work at the hospital, and I think I would have probably drifted in that direction, but I got a shortcut because of knowing him. I got a shortcut into the movement, and I'm entirely grateful for that. I felt I was very much a part of an historic period of time. It was pretty amazing. So,
yeah, I mean, it's so impressive to me.
So I was just thinking, when I came back from Selma, it must have been, or Louisiana, I guess. I came back, I guess, late in '65. And then we continued to do local stuff in Chicago. And then in '67, I left Chicago to go to Columbia School of Public Health here in New York City. So that's, in '67, I came to New York City. And continued with MCHR, continued with all the demonstrations. And another group formed called Health Pack, and we were there to, it was more of an investigative body, and one of the things we had was a prison project, and we all took part-time jobs at local prisons in New York, and then we all reported back and people wrote articles. So for a while I did a couple of clinic sessions every week at the Women's House of Detention, which at that time when I started was in Greenwich Village. But by the time I'd finished my stint, it was out on Rikers Island. And eventually it became so onerous getting out to Rikers Island that I stopped doing that. But it was an interesting project, that whole prison project. That
Can I just ask a question about that? So we have another segment where Anne Gordon and Marcia Thompson described their experiences working with the Brooklyn Men's Detention Center. And they described to me, you know, that was a detention center for folks that had minor infractions for the most part, but couldn't make bail. Was it similar at the Women's Detention Center?
Yes, it was a short-term facility. There were some people, I think, serving short sentences, but mostly it was people who were just waiting for trial.
Yeah.
It was amazing, actually. The House of Detention was a huge, tall building right in the middle of Greenwich Village, just off of 6th Avenue. And there were always people on the ground, on the pavement, talking up to the women. You could hear the conversations, and they would hold up the baby. It was really very upsetting in some ways, but also wonderful that they had that contact, and they lost all of that when the place moved out to Rikers Island.
Yeah. Now, were most of the people in the detention center Black?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't even remember seeing a white patient. I mean, there must have been some, but and the women were so nice. I mean, most of them were just accessories. They happened to be around when there was a drug bust. They were not criminals. You know, they were just unfortunate women caught up in an unfortunate situation. And so that was a good project. And then then I was at the School of Public Health, and of course in '68 there was that huge uprising at the school at Columbia. So I was part of the whole thing at Columbia. I don't have any pictures, but somebody is making a movie which might eventually get onto PBS, all about the uprising at Columbia when the students staged a big anti-war demonstration, took over the buildings, and then were fairly brutally expelled from the buildings by the police. And there's all sorts of dramatic pictures of students staggering out with blood all over their heads. So that was a fascinating demonstration that, again, MCHR, we sent teams of people in with our first aid kits, and we attended at that. So that must have been the spring of '68. And then, I don't remember if the Chicago Democratic Convention, I think was the summer of '68, and we sent...
It would have been.
We sent medical teams.
Right.
Yeah, so again, I went back to Chicago just for a couple of weeks to participate in the team of medical people at the demonstration, and we would be out in Grant Park helping people and out on the streets. It was interesting stuff.
Now, were you finding that you were able to recruit medical practitioners easily into the group, or was it getting more challenging as time went on?
No, I mean, there's always, among the medical profession, which tends to be somewhat conservative, there has always been a progressive wing, and the progressives just found us, and we found them, and we got good backing. We had money, and we were able to do this thing, renting cars and sending people to the South. So it was very heartwarming that there were that number of people. It wasn't just doctors, there were nurses and social workers and psychologists and dentists, and anybody with any sort of medical background was part of one of our teams. I'm trying to get the timing sequence. So that was the Democratic Convention. I say it must have been the summer of '68. And then January of '69, we had a big team at the Nixon inauguration, and we had huge demonstrations in the streets of Washington, and we were roaming around with our first aid kits and everything. I got a scar on my head from that one.
Gosh.
It was lucky I had a big fur hat on, and I got a policeman's baton on my head, so I just had a few stitches. So that was the only blood I shed.
Oh gosh.
And then, so I've said about the prison project. Oh, and then there was Woodstock.
Yeah.
So we also sent a medical presence to Woodstock, and we set up a medical tent on the top of the hill. We were far away from the main stage. There was a big medical tent on near the main stage that the local medical society from Sullivan County was running, but we had our own sort of countercultural tent up on the hill near the hog farm encampment, and that was an exciting time. And then we became, as the whole movement became more polarized, it was clear that white people were no longer welcome. It became very much a black movement at the 71, 72, and many people in MCHR continued, but it took on a much more anti-war effort. And I was involved with a lot of the draft burning demonstrations in New York. We had a medical presence down on Wall Street for all of those demonstrations. That was a very important part of MCHR for a while. And then
what do you think is attributable to making that change? I mean, was there a difference in leadership in terms of the movements, to shift from it being, white people being invited and welcomed to it just being a black movement?
It was the whole Black Power thing with the Panthers. I don't know if you saw, there was a wonderful program last night on Channel 13.
No, I missed that.
I'm sure it'll be repeated, the history of the Black Panthers. You really should watch it.
Okay.
And the rise of the Black Panthers and the whole Black Power movement, and Stokely Carmichael, who was one of the leaders of the civil rights movement, kind of swung over to Black Power, and white people became less and less welcome. And as I say, that's when MCHR became more involved with the anti-war. We'd always been involved with the anti-war stuff, but it became much more important. And we did, as I say, a lot of those demonstrations in Washington. We sent teams with groups to Washington for all the different marches. I remember the ring around the Pentagon. I don't know if, I don't think this picture will come. By this time it was 72, and this was one of the marches on Washington. That was myself with my daughter. She was born in 72.
Oh my gosh.
That was on one of the marches. I had a better picture of that, but I can't find it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So that was about 72, I think. And then, there were all sorts of other things, like there was the whole sort of anti-nukes thing, and there was the Woodstock thing, my Woodstock shirt. And this was much later. There's no blood for oil. That was much later.
Gosh.
And then Planned Parenthood.
Oh, of course.
Yay, Planned Parenthood. So that was more recent stuff. So, since those marches to Washington in the 70s, I really wasn't. I was busy. I had 2 children and several part-time jobs. And I became less participatory in the 70s, after about 72 or 3. When the children are little, you can take them places, but once they get a little bit older, you can't just drag them along. And then the only sort of local thing, I don't have a badge for that or anything, there was a big action here called Save the Ridge.
Ah, yes.
And that was in the 80s, and I think it was in the 80s. So we had lots of demonstrations here in New Paltz to save the ridge, and we did. We saved the ridge, and it's now part of the Minnewaska State Park.
Right.
So that's so that and the Planned Parenthood support is really the only things I've been doing lately. Every now and then I might go to a vigil or something, but I haven't been doing a whole lot, I'm afraid. I wish I had.
Well, I'm just looking at the time, and one of the things that is striking me the most as we're talking, and you may not realize this, but you have been you've had the biggest smile on your face as you're recalling these memories. And, you know, it seems to me that although a lot of these things happened 60 years ago or close to it, you clearly remember this time of your life very vividly.
Yeah.
And the smiles tell me that they're fond memories.
Yes.
And again, I go back to, you know, you started our conversation indicating that there was a sense of optimism. And you did mention that it feels different now. So there are still the problems, different problems, but still a significant racial inequality. You sensed feeling that this time feels different to you. It doesn't feel as optimistic.
Well, you know, not a lot has changed in almost 60 years. And, 64, yes, it's almost 60 years. I mean, I'm so pessimistic about the state of mind of at least half the people in the US. You know, I think we live in an amazing oasis here, East Coast, West Coast. We have sophisticated, educated, liberal people here, and you feel all right, but I am pessimistic. I don't see how people are going to change their ways unless they start from small children, babies in school, and I don't see that happening in the South or West or wherever things are not changing. I have no evidence that race relations are discussed in the schools, that families are thinking about it. I mean, you see some of the people on television, and they're just as bad as the people were at Little Rock, where you saw the white people,
right,
saying terrible things to the kids going to school. I mean, I hope that things can change, and maybe this movement will escalate, and maybe it will have some positive results. I can't predict what will happen.
Yeah, I don't think any of us can. Right now, as you know, I'm really just trying to gather information, understand what opportunities we might have here at Woodland Pond or as individuals. But this does feel different even than what you've just relayed, but I thank you so much for your time and certainly for your service. You, like many of our other residents, are a significant inspiration to me personally and professionally. So, we're all going to strive to do better and follow in your footsteps, but this has been fantastic. So thank you so much.
Thank you.